Hey guys, Chris Fix here. Today we're going to check to see how well Seafoam works in a small engine like a lawnmower. Before I test this out in my car engine, I want to see if it works in a lawnmower engine. It's easier to test, it's faster, and we can get a good idea of what to expect when we do this test in a car engine. In this test, we'll see if Seafoam actually does what it says. We'll do this by looking into the engine before the Seafoam, and then seeing how much carbon buildup there is in there. Then we'll run the Seafoam through the engine, go back in, and see if the engine cleaner actually removed any carbon deposits. So let's get some before footage and see what it looks like before we add the fuel cleaner. So this is a 4-stroke Honda engine for a push mower. Okay, this is a single piston engine. I have the piston pushed all the way back so we could get a good look at this. You can see the little grooves for the two valves. One's an intake valve, one's an exhaust valve. This is a carbureted engine. You can see right near the intake and exhaust valve, the engine's pretty clean, but right above that, it's all dirty. There's some carbon buildup. Let's see if the Seafoam could clean up this carbon buildup. Before we add the Seafoam, we want to get the engine nice and warm, so we're going to start it up and let it run for a few minutes. Okay, the engine's nice and hot, ran it for about 10 minutes, and now we're going to go pour the Seafoam through the intake as the engine's running. I'm going to take off the intake cover. I'm going to take off the intake filter, and since this is carbureted, I'm going to slowly pour the Seafoam right into the carburetor, and then it's going to get sucked in, mixed with the air and the fuel, and hopefully clean the piston. I just want to make it clear that I'm not being sponsored by Seafoam. This is my own individual test. I went out and bought the Seafoam myself, and I'm just as curious as you guys whether or not this stuff works. This is going to be one of 2 tests I'm doing. I'm doing a small engine test on my lawnmower, and then I'll be doing a test in my truck to see if Seafoam cleans a car engine out. I'm adding the Seafoam slowly, enough so that a bunch gets in there, but not too much so that the engine stalls. You want the engine to stall at the end, but not right now. Right now, you're using 1/3 of the can of Seafoam, just like it says in the instructions. And once you're done with that 1/3, you'll just pour enough so that it stalls out the engine. When you're stalling out the engine, you don't want to pour too much either. You don't want to hydrolock the engine, especially for one of these small engines. It'll be pretty easy to do. Now you're supposed to let it sit for about 5 minutes, restart it without adding this, and then let it run for a few minutes, and then we'll check the inside and see if it cleaned anything out. 5 minutes has elapsed. Let's start the engine up. That white smoke isn't actually carbon deposits being burned off, contrary to what most people think. It's actually because the oil that's in the Seafoam, when there's a lot of oil and it burns, it's white. They actually use this technique to create smoke screens on tanks. So after the exhaust goes clear and it's not smoky anymore, we can shut it off. Now we're gonna go in and see if Seafoam actually cleaned out the deposits in the cylinder. I'm gonna take the spark plug out. If we look at the spark plug actually has like a sheen to it. Before I took it out, it was dry. Now it has like an oily sheen on top, and I think that's the Seafoam. So the Seafoam probably did get mixed up in that cylinder pretty good, since it did leave an oily sheen on the spark plug. So that's interesting right there. So let's take a look inside. I can't wait to see this. This definitely looks better. I could actually see a difference, which is pretty sweet. Let's get a before and after comparison so we can get an idea of what the Seafoam actually cleaned. Here's the before, here's the after. You can see there's a big spot of carbon near the bottom that got cleaned off. The carbon in the area of the left valve cutout also got cleaned. The large light carbon deposits on the top side of the piston got cleaned up pretty well, and even the large carbon deposit on the top right got cleaned up. Well, there you go. I'm pretty impressed. That was pretty good. Now, I mean, I am using a carbureted engine. I'm using a small engine. This isn't a car, but I'm curious to see how this is going to work on a car, so I can't wait to try this out on a car. But as you saw, for a small engine, carbureted, this worked pretty good. And this is actually the kind of results I've been waiting for. You saw me test the gum out, and I was disappointed with the results there, but Seafoam, I was actually pretty impressed. You could see a clear before and after with the Seafoam. A lot of that carbon on the piston head was cleaned off, and that was using 1/3 of the can. Maybe if I used more than 1/3 of the can, it'll work even better. Now instead of a top tip, I'm going to do round 2. So we saw what Seafoam could do when you use 1/3 of it, and I'm curious to see if I use another third if it gets any cleaner, or if that's as clean as it's going to get with the Seafoam. So I'm going to go run another third of Seafoam right through the engine, and then we'll take another look and see if it cleaned it anymore. Okay, so I used another third, so there's only a third left in this container. Let's go see the inside of the engine, see if it got any cleaner. We're gonna have to see the before and after because this is hard to tell if it got any cleaner. Okay, so here's the before and after. So the before is the first time we ran the Seafoam through. The after is the second time we ran the Seafoam through. You can see there was more cleaning of the carbon at the top right, and also a little bit more carbon got cleaned at the left valve indent. So there was a little bit more cleaning, but it didn't get it completely clean. So I'm gonna try one more thing. Let's get this borescope camera out of here. So the last thing I'm going to try is I'm going to go through the spark plug hole here, and I'm going to add a little bit of Seafoam to coat the whole top of the piston. You don't want to add too much because then you could hydrolock the engine, but I'm going to get just enough so the whole top of the piston is coated by Seafoam. Since the engine is sideways and the piston's going in and out that way, if I added Seafoam to the cylinder, it'll only touch the very bottom of the piston. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tilt the engine up, so now the Seafoam will actually be on the piston head, and the carbon will soak, just like you soak dishes. So the lawnmower propped up. I'm going to be adding the Seafoam using a turkey baster. Let's go in here. And get a light coat of Seafoam on the cylinder head. Good. Just as verification that the whole piston is covered by Seafoam, let's go in here. I'm going to shake the engine a little bit so we can see the Seafoam move. And it's actually interesting. You can see some of the carbon deposits that are already loosened up, kind of moving around in the fluid. We'll let this sit for 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll start up the engine. After a 10-minute soak, I'm going to keep the spark plug hole open, and I'm going to try to start the engine. And what's going to happen is the piston's going to push out all that liquid. Liquid's not compressible, so I don't want to damage the engine by mistake. Even though there's not that much in here, I don't know the tolerances of this engine, so I'm going to get most of that liquid out. Okay, with most of the Seafoam out, let's put the spark plug in, start the engine. So let's see if soaking the piston head did anything. So soaking the Seafoam on the piston head actually cleaned off all the carbon really well. There's like little spots left, but pretty much the cylinder is clean. Now that being said, in a car engine, would I soak the piston? Unless if I have a major problem, no, I wouldn't. But I mean, that's up to you guys. You make the decision. And that concludes the test. So does Seafoam work? Well, we did the first test where we tested it the way it's supposed to be done, where you pour it in through the intake, and yes, it did work. It had pretty good results. It got some of that carbon out of there, and then we tried it again, and on the second time, it got a little bit more carbon off the piston head. And then we tried soaking the cylinder head with Seafoam, and that got the rest of the carbon off. Seafoam worked good enough for me by running it through the intake. In the future, unless it had so much carbon buildup that it was causing problems with the engine, I just used the intake method. I'm really excited to go test this out on a car engine, see how it works in there. Hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, remember to give it a thumbs up. Also, if you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing. And stay tuned for me testing the Seafoam in a car, and also testing other fuel and engine cleaners in other cars. Now we know for sure that Seafoam actually works.